Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. So today, we are going to explore psychic self-defense and methods in particular of psychic self-defense and sort of discuss it. On one level, I've avoided discussing psychic self-defense because it implies there is something you need to defend yourself from. If you're truly in access with the love and light energy, and you have over time created a positive framework of energy around you, you are protected, and your subconscious and higher self are protecting you all the time. So it is not something to be fearful of. But in my own case, I find information interesting and to see different techniques. For some people, it helps them to have something to do to convince their subconsciousness of protection. And also, I believe on a primal level that we have DNA memory of times in the past when people have used certain techniques that protected them. And in particular, one of the experts in psychic self-defense was Dion Fortune. It is my strongest recommendation, if this is something that interests you, that you read the entire book, Psychic Self-Defense by Dion Fortune. It is a classic. It is a sort of collection, an archive of ancient occult wisdoms and how to protect. The book carries a lot of information. There's a part 1 which describes the type of psychic attack, signs of attack, modern witchcraft, projection of the etheric body, vampirism, hauntings, non-human contacts, the pathologies involved. And there's some different diagnoses and the occult world and black lodges and the psychic element in mental disturbance. There's a diagnosis of psychic attack, the motives of psychic attack and how they're employed, and some description of different attacks, some first-person accounts. So this came to me. I had a friend who it seemed had been struggling with bizarre things happening all the time. Weird things going wrong with his car, and to the point where there were so many different weird events that would come up that I got the idea that he was just in a bad field of vibration, and that might have been brought about by someone else. And just in case, I had researched and gone back, something I had done a long time ago, to research this information on how to cleanse yourself. I've also had people email me about being told that they had a psychic attack, or they were being a psychic attacked, or somebody had a psychic attacked them, or used magic against them, or done magic spells against them. When I have been asked, I've advised some of the techniques that are here. Ways of blessing water, creating your sacred circle, very similar to some of what we've talked about in previous episodes about creating the sacred circle and calling the angels. So there's a lot of information here. I can only tell you in the evolution of myself that one of the good things in meditation is to call upon the angels. I do carry moldavite. I believe that's the most protective crystal that I personally have used. And I can compare when I'm wearing the moldavite and when I'm not. I can sense the vibration. It seems to put out a field of protection around you. I even sleep with moldavite, and it's an observation. I've had other people tell me something similar. So if you're feeling like you're being attacked, just get some moldavite. Try that. For some people, moldavite can be very powerful because if you're sensitive enough, you can feel your heart rush. Sometimes people's cheeks flush red. So it is a very powerful thing. I've had mine for a long time. But there are other things that I've read, such as using garlic, which is discussed in the Law of One. And there is exercises in the Law of One to protect those people that were channeling from negative entities. And in fact, there is a negative entity attack that is discussed during that channeling that is a part of that story. So they refer to the book by Dion Fortune as well. And they're using some of these rituals and techniques. And it also opens up the magical personality as well. And it's just good to have this knowledge. It's something that everybody should at least have an awareness of in terms of how to protect themselves from something that might be an attack. So I recommend you read the beginning parts of that book to get sort of the background. And I wanted to go over some of the methods that Dion Fortune taught. She was a very classic occult teacher, definitely on the white magic side. If you read her stuff, it always carries warnings of how you can easily become manipulated and discussing sort of the dark side and how the ego can take over. There's a lot of other books that she wrote that I recommend, including The Cosmic Doctrine, which was completely insane for the time that it was written and reminds me very much of the Law of One material, almost as if it's coming from a similar channel, sort of describing the cosmos and the hierarchy, and a lot of more unusual and very bizarre information. I did go over that in the Law of One episode on the Logos. If you check that out, that one I was talking way too fast. But Fortune begins her discussion of methods of psychic defense later in the book by explaining that in writing for the general reader an account of the methods to be used in combating a psychic attack, I'm reminded of those excellent manuals upon medicine and surgery, which an enlightened board of trade insists shall be provided for the captains of ships, together with a cupboard full of remedies, harmless and otherwise. When an emergency arises, the worthy skipper reads through the chapter he believes to bear upon the case in hand and goes to work as best be may. On these occasions, the personal factor is a large one. So it is in dealing with psychic trouble. Wide experience is needed for diagnosis, and specially trained faculties and specially developed powers are needed to cope with the conditions that may be found. This book is more in the nature of a manual of first aid than a treatise on treatment. We must also bear in mind that just as the potent drug is effectual in the hands of the expert but dangerous in the hands of the amateur, so do the most potent occult formula need special equipment for their use. Moreover, a formula that is used indiscriminately by the uninitiated is apt to lose its potency and become useless. The popular expletive which GBS introduced into polite society in his play Pygmalion is the worn-out remnant of the once powerful adjuration by Our Lady. Moreover, no two cases are alike, and the clear-cut typical case is a rarity and treasure. Common sense, natural aptitude, and experience are the exorcist's best equipment. Having made his diagnosis and being ready to proceed to the handling of the case, the exorcist has to achieve three things. He must repair his patient's aura, clear the atmosphere of his environment, and break his contact with the forces that are causing the trouble. These three things are interdependent, and not one of them is first or last. It is next to impossible to get a damaged aura to heal if you do not clear the atmosphere, nor will the atmosphere remain clear for long if you cannot break the contacts. Theoretically, the ideal thing to do is to break the contacts as a start, but unfortunately in actual practice, these often take a good deal of finding and a good deal of handling after they have been found. Meanwhile, something has to be done to keep the patient going. The exorcist has got to clear himself a place in which to work, or if the victim of the attack is defending himself single-handed, he has got to throw up some temporary defenses while he digs himself in. The first thing to do when dealing with an occult attack is to make a temporary clearance of the atmosphere and so gain breathing space in which to reform the shattered ranks. This is more readily achieved by an organized ritual than by unaided willpower. Any act performed with intention becomes a rite. We can take a bath with no more in mind than physical cleanliness, in which case the bath will cleanse our bodies and no more. Or we can take a bath with a view to ritual cleanliness, in which case its efficacy will extend beyond the physical plane. We therefore perform certain physical actions not only as a means of clearing etheric conditions, but also as a means of definitely affecting astral ones through imagination, a very potent weapon in all magical operations. Physical objects become impregnated with etheric emanations and retain them for considerable periods, as a knife will retain a smell of onions and taint everything that is cut with it. These emanations, magnetism as they are called in the terminology of occult science, profoundly affect any sensitive person who is in contact with them. There is something in the old superstition that it is unlikely to place boots on a table. It is equally unadvisable to place outdoor garments on a bed. You do not know whom you have rubbed shoulders with in bus or train, so why give their magnetism a chance to contaminate your sleeping place? Fortunately for all of us, magnetism is a very fugitive force, and although it may be potent when fresh, it soon fades unless it has been deliberately created by means of ritual. The terrible atmosphere that surrounds the victim of an occult attack and permeates all his belongings is not difficult to get rid of, though it will rapidly reform unless the conditions which gave rise to it are cleared up. The most effectual way of getting rid of magnetism is to move to a fresh place. Take nothing of one's old belongings with one. This, however, is a counsel of perfection for most people. Fortunately, there are other devices which enable us to attain our ends nearly as effectively. If it be in any way possible, let the victim of an occult attack move temporarily to another environment, taking with him as few of his belongings as possible, and let him make the move in new clothes or in clothes that are just back from the cleaner. Let him, moreover, keep his whereabouts a secret as far as it is convenient for him to do so. There's an old superstition that a witch can be thrown off the trail by crossing running water. It is my opinion that many of these old folk beliefs have a basis in fact. However, overlaid by superstition, they may have become. I once had a curious experience which gives support to this opinion. I was about to take part in an important piece of occult work, to which I knew there would be opposition. A friend who was concerned in the matter asked me to dine with her on the night before the day fixed for the proceeding. We were both conscious of tension in the atmosphere, and she suggested that I should remain the night at her flat instead of returning to my own, informing no one of my whereabouts in order to throw the attack off the trail. The maneuver was not wholly successful, and we had a rather trying night, and I was conscious of a good deal of psychic tension the next day. I decided, therefore, to walk to the appointed place across Hyde Park in order to refresh myself. When part of the way across, I suddenly felt that the tension relaxed, and I was able to go through the work in hand without interference. I told my friend of this experience, and she questioned me as to where I was when it took place. We looked up the spot on the map and found that I had just crossed the underground conduit which takes the overflow from the Serpentine. I did not know of the old superstition concerning running water, neither did I know of the existence of the conduit. Nevertheless, the sense of relief was sufficiently marked to cause me to mention it when I saw my friend again and to be able to indicate the spot where it had occurred. We have very little exact knowledge concerning these subtle forces, which are the basis of both occult attack and spiritual healing. But we have good reason to believe that in their nature they are so closely analogous to electricity. They are not inanimate forces, however, but have in their nature something that is akin to life, though of a low type. It has been my experience that if we work on a blended analogy of electricity and bacteriology, we get pretty near the facts, as near at any rate as our present state of knowledge permits. In other words, if we act as if thought possessed the combined qualities of electricity and bacteria, we shall have a sufficiently accurate method of steering by dead reckoning in the absence of certain knowledge and actual sight. If we consider the various methods used in folk magic of all ages and races, we shall observe that they are in agreement with these hypotheses. Running water, we know, has peculiar electrical qualities, as it's witnessed by its effect on the divining rod in the hands of a sensitive person. Whatever it may be that affects the diviner is probably the same thing that affects the occult attack. When we recall, moreover, that running water will throw hounds off the scent just as effectively as it will the alleged witch, we may feel that we cannot be accused of gross superstition. If we give the old folk tradition a trial and note the results. Water, again, is the vehicle of purification. It is used in the rite of baptism by the church and in the preparation of the place by the occultist about to perform a ceremony. Strictly speaking, there should be a trace of salt in the water thus employed, and both salt and water are blessed with powerful invocations when the priest is preparing holy water, whether for a baptism or for placing in the holy water stoop for the use of the congregation. As far as the occultist is concerned, salt to him is the emblem of the earth. It is also a crystalline substance, and crystalline substances in their different forms receive and hold etheric magnetism better than anything else. Water, on the other hand, is the emblem of the psychic sphere. These two realms between them contain by far the greatest part of occult evil. It is rare indeed that spiritual wickedness in high places will reach up as far as the airy realms of mind or the fiery realms of spirit. If we want to get in touch with or operate upon a particular sphere, we use as base a substance appropriate thereto. Consequently, a solution of salt and water makes a better base than either salt or water could do separately, because it enables us to cover the whole of the sphere of probable operations in a single act. It may be interesting to note concerning the magical properties of crystalline substances that crystals are used in wireless apparatus to pick up the subtle vibrations of the ether. Once again, we are close upon the trail of our electrobacteriological analogy. It is an excellent plan when trying to break an undesirable psychic contact to immerse oneself in a bath of water that has been especially consecrated for the purpose, redressing in new or at least clean clothing afterwards, and if it be by any means possible, moving into a different room. If this cannot be done, move the bed into a different position, taking care to turn it at a different angle. That is to say, if you've been in the habit of sleeping lying north to south, place your bed so that you will now be lying east and west. The following prayer may be used for the blessing of the salt and water. Pointing the first and second fingers at the salt. I exorcise thee, creature of earth, by the living God, by the holy God, by the omnipotent God, that thou mayest be purified of all evil influences in the name of Adonai, who is Lord of angels and of men. Extending the hand over the salt. Creature of earth, adore thy Creator in the name of God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and of Jesus Christ his Son and Savior. I consecrate thee to the service of God in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Pointing the first and second fingers at the water. I exorcise thee, creature of water, by the living God, by the holy God, by the omnipotent God, that thou mayest be purified from all evil influences in the name of Elohim Sabaoth, who is Lord of angels and of men. Extending the hand over the water. Creature of water, adore thy Creator in the name of God the Father Almighty, who decreed a firmament in the midst of the waters, and of Jesus Christ his Son, our Savior. I consecrate thee to the service of God in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Then, casting the salt into the water, we pray thee, O God, Lord of heaven and earth, and of all that in them is, both visible and invisible, that thou mayest stretch forth thy right hand of thy power upon these creatures of the elements, and hallow them in thy holy name. Grant that this salt may make for health of body, and this water for health of soul, and that there may be banished from the place where they are used every power of adversity and every illusion and artifice of evil, for the sake of Jesus Christ our Savior. Amen. The water thus consecrated may be used as a bath, or for making the sign of the cross upon the forehead, or for sprinkling about a place. When thus using it, the following prayer may be employed. In the name which is above every other name, and in the power of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, I exorcise all influences and seeds of evil. I lay upon them the spell of Christ's holy church, that they may be bound fast as with chains and cast into outer darkness, that they trouble not the servants of God. In pointing or making the sign of the cross, the first and second fingers are extended, and the third and fourth are bent towards the palm of the hand, and the thumb laid upon their nails. When the hand is extended in blessing over the water and salt, it is held flat, fingers together and parallel, the thumb stretched at right angles to the forefingers. If there is sufficient occult force at work to produce physical phenomenon, it is very advisable to take precautions to prevent materializations taking place. The physical phenomenon are of several types. They may take the form of noises, usual creakings, thuds, or more rarely bell-like notes or wailing sounds. If actual words are heard, auditory hallucination should be suspected, for in the absence of a medium, spirit messages are given to the inner ear, not to the auditory nerve. Lights may also be seen, usually taking the form of dim balls of luminous mist drifting like soap bubbles. They may be of any size, from mere points of light to considerable dimensions, some 6 feet or more in diameter. In these spheres of dim luminosity, psychics can generally see forms, sometimes human, sometimes from the animal kingdom. Whitish gray clouds can also sometimes be seen, rising pillar-wise from the floor like smoke. These are usually fixed to one place and do not move about the room as do the spheres of light, such movement as occurs being within themselves, like the eddyings of smoke caught under a tumbler. More rarely a distinctive odor may be noticed, and still more rarely there may be precipitations of powdery substances or slime. Light objects may also be overturned or thrown about the room. There are certain substances which experience has proved to be effectual in preventing the condensation of etheric energy from taking place. Consecrated salt dissolved in vinegar and placed in saucers about the room will cope effectively with low degrees of force, but for high potencies, nitric acid is the best thing to use, a small quantity being poured into a saucer and exposed to the air. It is best to use it well diluted to prevent accidents, for it is not the strength of the acid in the saucer that is efficacious, but its evaporation into the air, and it will evaporate just as well when diluted as when neat. In what manner it works, I have not the slightest idea, but its value is well known among psychic experimenters. The methods of occult attack employed in modern Europe are exclusively mental, so far as my experience of them has gone at any rate. That is to say, they work by the mind on the mind and only affect physical conditions incidentally. In the East and among primitive people, however, other aspects have to be considered, as a much more etheric type of magic is in use under primitive conditions of life upon virgin soils. For these etheric operations, material substances are required in order that the magnetism attached to them may be made use of. Hair combings, nail parings, cast-off clothes, objects in familiar use all contain magnetism. Consequently, care should be taken to see that such things are effectively disposed of when discarded. Combings and nail parings should be promptly burnt. Cast-off clothing should never be allowed to go out of the possession of the owner until it has had at least 3 days exposure to the sun and air in the open. The magnetism will be more effectually dispelled if the garments be laid on the earth, especially freshly turned earth, than if hung on a line. The same applies to furniture. The chair that has been a custom seat, and above all things the bedding, should be thoroughly aired and sunned before they are parted with. The same precautions are useful if any second-hand article has been purchased. The proposal of night soil should also be carefully arranged for and entrusted to reliable servants, abundant disinfectants and deodorants being constantly in use. Precautions should be observed to prevent any native obtaining access to fresh excrete. After the animal heat has gone out of it, the magical value has greatly decreased. A dirty handkerchief, too, is an effectual magnetic link, and so are dressings from a wound, anything, in fact, that bears traces of any of the byproduct of the body. But apart from any question of psychic attack, there are 2 substances which are especially prized for purposes of magic. These are the seminal fluid and menstrual blood. The former is used in fertility rites, and the latter in certain forms of evocation. These substances are exceedingly hard to come by in primitive lands because the natives, knowing their significance, guard them most scrupulously, but the Memsahib has no suspicions and allows stained garments and bed linen to go into the hands of the washerman to be disposed of at his discretion, satisfied so long as the garments themselves return safely at the end of the week, never thinking to inquire what becomes of the water in which they are washed. There are many parts of the world in which the sale of these magical substances is a profitable sideline of the laundering business. In Europe, menstrual blood and feces are part of the magical substances of the black mass, being made up into patterns with wheat flour, a time-honored method of clearing a bad psychic atmosphere out of a house, and one which I have known in my own experience to be effectual, is to stew garlic about the place, leave it overnight, and then take it up and burn it. Among country people, an onion is sometimes placed in a vase in the mantelpiece as if it were a hyacinth bulb when unpleasant visitors are expected, and solemnly burnt in the kitchen fire as soon as they have departed, it being believed that the onion tribe have the property of absorbing noxious emanations. It is curious to note in this respect that in one coal mine, to my knowledge, the miners are forbidden to take onions down into the workings as part of their dinners because the onions absorb the underground gases and become poisonous. My informant told me that he and others had smuggled onions down and learnt from bitter experience the wisdom of this rule. In part 2, Fortune says, here are 2 types of practical psychic work which may be used separately or in combination, the latter method, in my opinion, giving by far the best results, though the exponents of each are apt to decry the other. The method which we will distinguish, the meditative method, consists of meditation upon abstract qualities such as peace, harmony, protection, and the love of God. It is the method of the New Thought school, and its value lies in the harmonizing effect it has upon the emotional state and its counteracting of harmful autosuggestions. The other method, which we will call the invocative, insists in the invocation of external potencies and the employment of formal methods for the focusing of their force. This method has many gradations of complexity and an infinite variety of technique. It ranges from the simplest prayer, which calls upon Christ with the sign of the cross, to the most elaborate rituals of exorcism performed with bell, book, and candle. The essence of the system lies in the attempt to dissect out from the general force of good the particular aspect of energy that is needed, and the use of some symbol to act as a magical vehicle of that force upon the plane of form. This symbol may be a mental picture of the blue robe of Our Lady. It may be the action of making the sign of the cross. It may be the consecrated water sprinkled for token for cleansing, or it may be some object specially magnetized to act as a talisman. In the invocative method, the aim is to concentrate the force, and therefore some symbol of form has to be employed. In the meditative method, the aim is to escape beyond the bounds of form into the atmosphere of pure spirit, too exalted for evil to enter, and therefore the use of any form or formula is eschewed as calculated to prevent the soul from rising into this pure air. In my opinion, and with all due respect to the practitioners of this latter method, much better results would be attained if the invocative method, with its utilization of the efficacy of formula, were used to enable the mind to climb into the pure air of spiritual consciousness where there is no evil. It is only those who are highly trained in meditation who can rise on the planes unaided. It is exceedingly difficult to take off from sense consciousness without the use of some kind of psychological device to act as a springboard. There seems to be little object in refusing, for purely academic reasons, to avail ourselves of method of proven efficacy. If we realize that the use of forms and symbols is merely a psychological device to enable the mind to get a grip on the intangible, we shall not fall into the error of superstitious observances. A superstition has been defined as the blind use of a form whose significance has been forgotten. On the other hand, we shall be unwise to rely exclusively upon formal or ceremonial methods, unless at the same time we use meditative methods in order to purify and harmonize our own consciousness. If we neglect this aspect of our work, we shall reinfect by our own vibrations the magic circle as fast as we have cleared it. It is not much use sealing a circle with the protective names if we allow a panic-stricken imagination to run riot, picturing every conceivable kind of evil and leaving blank spaces for the possibility of inconceivable kinds. Equally, however, we shall find it very much easier to perform the harmonizing meditation if we are working with the protection of a magical circle. To attempt to perform the work of exorcism solely by the means of meditation is like raising a weight by the unaided effort of our 2 hands. The employment of the magical method resembles the use of a lever or pulley and block. Our muscles are still the sole source of energy, but the utilization of mechanical principles we have redoubled there. Let us then in meditation use symbols to concentrate our attention. We shall find this much easier than meditation in terms of abstract thought. Indeed, in times of stress and crisis, abstract thought may be impossible for us unless we are very experienced in its use. But we shall seldom reach a state when we cannot picture the cross and call upon the name of Christ. Occult attacks may be divided into two types: those which take place by means of thought forms, and those which operate by means of a current of force. But even in the latter case, the current of force soon gathers itself or germinates thought forms congenial to its nature. Therefore, in every psychic disturbance, the thought form is a factor which has to be considered and dealt with, and which in fact forms the readiest means of diagnosis, for it is by the perception of the associated thought forms that the experienced psychic is able to detect the nature of the attack. Thought force is a thing which has no relation to geographical position, but is a matter of pure consciousness and of tuning into its keynote. We can pick up the forces of dead faiths 1,000 years after the death of their last votary, and upon the opposite side of the globe to that in which they flourished. But thought forms are a different matter. They have position in space, and although they can't be moved about with the speed of thought, and can be withdrawn to the subtlest level of the astral, and there anchored to an idea, and thus prevented from impinging upon the planes of form for all practical purposes, nevertheless, although they do not occupy space, they can be referred to definite positions in space. They can, for instance, be associated with a particular object, and will follow that object about, remaining within its magnetic field. The immediate magnetic field is anything from 12 to 30 feet. The remote magnetic field from 100 to 300 yards. Powerful holy centers, like Glastonbury or Lourdes, have a bigger magnetic field than this, extending possibly to a couple of miles. They are also interconnected among themselves by lines of force. These things have to be taken into account in the practical occult work. When we are confronted by a disturbing influence emanating from a focus of power, such as the site of an old temple, we've got to deal with the remote magnetic field by means of ceremonial, as this is a method that can only be used by a high-grade initiate. We will not consider it here. For all practical purposes, in a psychic attack, it is the immediate magnetic field that has to be considered. The best method to deal with this is to make a magic circle. A mere banishing by itself is not so effective as a banishing performed within a circle, because the circle will effectively prevent the banished forces from flowing back again. There are various methods of performing this operation, but the principle of all valid ones is the same. The more potent conjurations cannot be given in these pages because their effective use depends upon the grade of initiation possessed by the person who proposes to use them, and to possess a formula without the grade to which it belongs is as unsatisfactory as possessing a gun without any knowledge of shooting. The formula I will give will be found effectual for all ordinary conditions. Extraordinary conditions can only be dealt with by a person who has had experience. In making the magic circle, the operator stands upright facing east. He faces east because the magnetic current on which he proposes to operate runs from east to west. His first procedure must be to steady his own vibrations and purify his aura. In order to do this, he makes the Kabbalistic cross on breast and brow. Touching his forehead, he says, "To thee, O God." Touching his solar plexus, "Be the kingdom." Touching his right shoulder, and the power. Touching his left shoulder, and the glory. Clasping his hands, "Unto the ages of the ages. Amen." By this formula, the operator affirms the power of God as sole creator and supreme law of the universe to which all things must bow. And he establishes this formula magnetically in his aura for the actions of making the sign of the cross upon himself. This sign is not an exclusively Christian symbol and can be used as readily by the Jew as the churchman, for it is the equilimbed cross of nature that is being used, not the cavalry cross, of which the shaft is double the length of the crossbar, and which the symbol of sacrifice. The equilimbed cross refers to the four quarters of the globe, and the four elements and the formula associated with it proclaims the dominion of God over these, and thereby occultly formulates his kingdom within the sphere of the operator. The operator next imagines himself to be clasping in his right hand a large cross-handled sword, such as is depicted in pictures of crusaders. He holds it point upward, point upright, and says, "In the name of God, I take in hand the sword of power for defense against evil and aggression." And he imagines himself to be towering up to twice his natural height. A tremendous, armed, and mailed figure, vibrating with the force of the power of God, with which he has been charged by his formulation of the swords of power. He now proceeds to draw the magic circle upon the floor with the point of the sword of power, and he should see in his imagination a line of flame following the point of the sword, consisting of small flames, such as spring up when methylated spirit is split and ignited, but of a gold pale color. Little practice should enable the circle of light to be formulated effectually. Keep on going around the circle until it is formulated. The circle should always be drawn diagonal, that is to say, from east to south, to west to north. In the same way, the hands of a clock would move were the clock laid face upwards on the floor. The contrary way is Widdershins, the way in which the witches danced at the Sabbats. The diagonal movement affirms the rule of God's law in nature because it is the way of the sun. The Widdershins movements repudiated God's rule over nature by moving against the sun and resisting an occult attack. The whole formula should be tuned to the keynote of asserting God's dominion over all existence. The aim of the operating being to align himself with cosmic law and cause the power of God to deal with the interference. The circle being formulated, the operator ceasing to visualize the sword, but still visualizing the circle, clasps his hands in prayer, and raising them above his head towards the east, he prays, "May mighty Archangel Raphael protect me from all evil approaching from the east." Turning to the south, he repeats the same formula in prayer to Michael. Turning to the west, he invokes Gabriel. Turning to the north, he invokes Uriel. Facing to the east again and thus completing the circle, he repeats the formula of the Kabbalistic cross. This formulation of the magic circle is especially valuable for protecting the sleeping place. The circle being drawn around the bed, it is not necessary to move about the room or shift the furniture in order to draw the circle. It will be formulated wherever it is visualized to be. It is necessary to reaffirm the circle each time the tides change. That is to say, a circle made after sundown will hold good till sunrise, and a circle made after sunrise will maintain its potency till sunset. After the circle has been affirmed a number of times in the same place, its influence will persist for a considerable period. But it is advisable to reformulate it morning and evening during the active phase of an attack. Incense burnt within the circle is very helpful, but care has to be exercised in the choice of an incense. Joss sticks of unknown composition should never be used, as they are usually compounded with a view to assisting manifestation. Good quality church incense, such as can be bought at most church furnishers, is safe and satisfactory because it is compounded according to traditional recipes. Cheaper qualities may not fulfill these conditions. In dealing with elementals or non-human entities, the pentagram or pentalpha is the best weapon. This is the 5-pointed star drawn in a particular way, pointing the first and second fingers of the right hand and folding the others into the palm and touching their tips with the thumb. Proceed to draw the pentagram in the air, keeping the elbow stiff and swinging the arm at full length. Start with the right arm, across the body, the hand about the level of the left hip, the extended fingers pointing downwards and outwards. Swing it upwards as if drawing a straight line in the air until the fingers point straight upwards above the head at arm's length. Now sweep it down again, keeping the elbow stiff until the hand occupies the corresponding position upon the right side to that from which it started on the left. You have now drawn a gigantic V upside down. Next, swing the hand across the body on a rising incline until it is stretched on a level within the left shoulder, pointing to the left. Bring it across the body horizontally until it is in the same position on the right, fingers pointing away from the body. Now swing it downwards across the body till the hand has come back to the point by the left hip whence it started. This is an exceedingly potent sign. The value of the 5-pointed star, the symbol of humanity, is widely known among occultists, but its potency depends upon the manner in which it is drawn. The method I have given is the correct one for banishing. The potency of the sign may be illustrated by an experience of my own in using it, which the skeptical are at liberty to doubt if they wish. I merely mention it for the sake of those who may be interested. I was taking part in some work with an Indian occultist when I became suspicious that all was not as it should be, protested, and was asked to withdraw. I did so, determined to watch proceedings from a distance, and if my suspicions were confirmed, to have an expose. A few days later, I was sitting in my room one afternoon chatting with a friend. It was just getting dusk, and we were talking by the light of a gas fire. Suddenly, we were both aware simultaneously of a presence in the room and turned spontaneously in the same direction. My friend sensed an antagonistic presence, and I, being more psychic, saw who it was and had no difficulty in perceiving the form of my Indian associate in an egg-shaped sphere of misty yellow light. I told my friend to quit the room and wait in the hall, and as soon as the door closed behind her, I made use of the pentagram I have described, together with certain names of power that are unsuitable for disclosure in these pages. Immediately, the appearance in the corner by the door shattered and vanished. At the same time, there was a resounding crack, which my friend heard in the hall. I called to her to return, and as she entered, she exclaimed, "Look what has happened to the door," and we found that one of the panels had split clean in two. It was this that had evidently caused the loud crack we had heard. I offer no explanation of this incident for the good and sufficient reason that I do not know what the explanation may be. I merely state what happened. My readers can explain it as they please. When it is not possible to seal the room, it is a very useful thing to be able to seal the aura. Stand upright and cross yourself by touching the forehead, breast, right shoulder, and left shoulder, saying, "By the power of the Christ of God within me, whom I serve with all my heart and with all my soul and with all my strength." Extend your hands forward as far as you can reach at the level of the solar plexus, fingertips touching them. Sweep them around to the back, touch the fingers together behind you, saying, "I encompass myself about with the divine circle of His protection, across which no mortal air dares to set its foot." This is an old monkish formula. It is very effectual, but its potency only lasts for about 4 hours. There are various other devices which are useful not only in dealing with psychic attacks, but in any case of undue influence or domination. If you have to interview persons whose influence you find overwhelming, imagine they are separated from you by a sheet of plate glass. You can see them and hear them, but their magnetism cannot reach you. Visualize this sheet of glass until it appears to you to be absolutely tangible. If you have to associate with persons who distress you, but are not actually interviewing them, imagine that they are separated from you by a brick wall and say to yourself, "You just aren't there. I can't see you or hear you, or you simply don't exist." When dealing with a person who saps your vitality, interlace your fingers and lay your folded hands upon your solar plexus, keeping your elbows pressed against your sides. Keep your feet touching each other. You have thus contracted all your own terminals and made of your body a closed circuit. No magnetism will go out from you while you maintain this attitude. Your friend will probably complain of your lack of sympathy, however kindly you may speak. If anyone tries to dominate you by gazing intently into the eyes, Do not attempt to return gaze for gaze, for this only leads to an exhausting struggle in which you may get the worst of it. But look steadily at the spot just above the base of their nose, between the inner ends of the eyebrows. If you are merely dealing with an ordinary bully, you will immediately have the upper hand. If, however, your antagonist has knowledge of mind power, you may not be able to dominate him, but he certainly will not be able to dominate you, and the result will be a stalemate. Do not attempt to dominate him. Merely keep your eyes on the spot and wait for him to weary of his attempt to dominate you. You will not have long to wait. By the use of the methods described in the preceding pages, any person of normal courage and mentality, provided he avoids drugs, alcohol, and long periods without food, can, if he does not lose his nerve, wear down any ordinary psychic attack, or in the case of attacks of abnormal potency, can at least ensure himself this time to make good his escape and seek help. The sacraments are also a most potent source of spiritual power, and a church where the Blessed Sacrament is reserved, or which is sufficiently old to have been consecrated before the Reformation, is an effectual sanctuary. Psychic trouble not infrequently arises owing to the formulation of an undesirable rapport. In order to understand the nature of this problem, we must consider the whole subject of rapport. We've already considered in some detail the question of telepathic suggestion. Rapport might be considered as the passive aspect of that which telepathic suggestion is the active aspect. Informs, in fact, the basic condition necessary for telepathic suggestion to take place. Two people who are in rapport might be described as astral Siamese twins. Although the physical bodies are independent units, the astral bodies are linked in such a manner there is free circulation of astral force between them, just as the circulatory system of the mother is connected through the umbilical cord with the unborn child, and the same blood circulating freely through both. This fact explains many important occult phenomena. It is the real key to marriage and explains many facts in the relationship of parent and child. It also accounts for some important aspects of the relation of pupil and teacher. But not only is it possible for a rapport to be established between two individuals, but between an individual and a group. This fact plays an important part in all fraternity work. It is also possible to establish rapport between a human being and other kingdoms of nature, with discarnate entities, superhuman beings, and in fact, with any form of life which an individual can form a sympathetic understanding. There must be some ground of sympathy as the basis for the formulation of a rapport. But once formed, it can be developed almost indefinitely. It is a curious fact that if a rapport is long continued, the persons thus united gradually come to resemble each other. We all know the horsey type of man, also the son of the soil, of whom it was expressly remarked, "Father in the pigsty, you'll know him by his hat." When two human beings are in rapport, the less positive of the two tends to lose his own individuality and becomes the pale reflection of the other. It is for this reason that the Western occultist, who values individuality highly, does not take personal pupils in the same way as he does the Eastern guru, but prefers to work through a ritual with a group because this method is more impersonal. But even so, the individual members of a group will undergo certain changes whereby they are tuned to the group tone, so that there will be a certain common denominator which they all possess. Who cannot recognize the sign manual of the Christian Scientist, the Theosophist, the Quaker? Any system which has group meditation rapidly puts its mark on its members. In this fact, of course, lies much of the value of association with a worthy group. In it equally lies the detriment of association with an unworthy group. Let us consider what happens when a person of ordinary good character becomes associated with a group of degenerate moral tone. He will either find himself in such sharp antagonism to the group mind that he will have no option but to withdraw, or he will rapidly but unconsciously be tuned to the keynote of his new associates. Without his being aware of the fact, his moral sense will have become blunted, and he will accept as a matter of course what he would originally have turned from in disgust. Rapport once established, other things besides the general feeling tone can be shared. Actual ideas can be transferred from one mind to another, as in telepathy, and in the same way vital force can be transmitted. It is this fact which is the explanation of certain types of spiritual healing. When etheric vitality is being transmitted, it is necessary that the persons concerned should be within the immediate magnetic field of each other. But when astral force is in question, this is not necessary. Transmission is independent of space. We are now considering the legitimate use of this force for healing or for teaching and developing neophytes, so we will not therefore consider its modus operandi in detail. Enough has been said to show what way it works. Let us now proceed to the consideration of the practical methods of breaking such a rapport, if for any reason it is desired to discontinue its use. To astral vision, the telepathic link appears as a ray of light, a shining cord, or some similar thought form, because it is in this form that is usually formulated by the person who is making the magnetic link. It sometimes happens, however, if the operator has a high grade of initiation, that instead of connecting the ray directly to the person with whom he desires to be in touch, he will formulate an astral animal at the end of it, to which he transfers a modicum of his own consciousness. This animal form is called a watcher. It does not act on its own initiative unless it's attacked. When it defends itself according to the nature of the species in whose likeness it is made, the use of a watcher is to obtain a record of what is transpiring without the necessity of focusing consciousness thereon. When the psychic substance of the watcher is reabsorbed by the adept, he becomes aware of the content of the watcher's consciousness. The disadvantage of this method lies in the vulnerableness of the watcher to psychic attack and the fact that its projector is affected if it is injured or disintegrated. In dealing with the thought form, always bear in mind that it is the product of the imagination, and it is in no sense self-existent. What the imagination has made, the imagination can unmake. If the maker of a thought form has thought it into existence by picturing it imaginatively, you can equally well think it out of existence by picturing it clearly and imagining it bursting into 1,000 fragments, or going up in flames, or dissolving into water and being absorbed by the soil. That which is thought into existence by the imagination can be thought out of existence by the imagination. If what is taken for a thought form resists destruction by this method, it is probably an artificial elemental. Now there are two such elementals, one kind being ensouled by the invocation of elemental essence into a thought form, and the other by the projection of something of the magician's own nature into it. If it is ensouled by elemental essence, the use of the pentagram will serve to banish it. But if it is of the kind that is ensouled by the magician's own force, another method must be used, known as absorption. Now, absorption is a very high-grade method, and its successful use depends upon the state of consciousness of the user. Each individual has to decide for himself whether in any given case, at any given moment, he's in a state fit to attempt it. Unless he can completely steady his own vibrations and arrive at a state of perfect serenity and freedom from all sense of effort, he should not make the attempt. We will, however, describe the method for the benefit of those who care to try it. Harmonizing himself by meditation upon the Christ, the adept, as soon as he is satisfied that his own vibrations are steady, proceeds to call up before his astral vision the image of the form he intends to destroy. He sees it clearly in all its details and sinks to divine its nature, whether it's a vehicle for malice or lust or vampiric action. These are the three most common, and it can almost certainly be assigned to one or other of these classes. Having discerned the type of force with which he has to deal, he then proceeds to meditate upon its opposite, concentrating upon purity and selflessness if the force be lust, compassion, and love. If it be malice, and upon God as the creator and sustainer of all life, if it be vampiric. He continues this meditation until he feels himself suffused with the quality upon which he is meditating, until he feels so imbued with purity and selflessness that lust causes him to feel nothing but pity, malice causes him to feel nothing but compassion. And in regard to vampirism, he is so assured that his life is hid with Christ in God that he would willingly let the vampire finish its meal in peace, if he could thereby help it. In fact, the adept who proposes to perform a magical absorption has to reach the point where he has clearly realized the nothingness of the evil he proposes to absorb, and no longer has any feelings towards it but pity for an ignorance that thinks it can gain any good thing for itself in this way. He desires to uplift and educate and free the misguided soul from its bondage until he has arrived at the point when he has no other feeling than this towards his persecutor. It is not safe for him to attempt an absorption. Having satisfied himself that he is ready for the attempt, he proceeds to draw the thought form towards him by pulling in the silver cord that connects it with his solar plexus, if it be a vampiric thought form, or by opening its aura to it and enfolding it, if it be one of the other two types. He literally sucks it in. This process should be done slowly and gradually, taking some minutes in the doing. If it be done suddenly, the adept may not find it possible to keep his own vibration steady, and then he will indeed be in an unpleasant situation. As the thought form is absorbed, the adept will feel a reaction in his own nature corresponding to the type of thought form. If it is a lust force, he will feel desire rise within him. If it is a malicious force, he will feel anger. If it's a vampire, he will feel bloodlust. He must immediately overcome this feeling and revert to his meditation upon the opposite quality, maintaining it until his vibrations are once more fully harmonized. He will then know that the evil force has been neutralized and there is much less evil in the world. He will immediately feel a great access of vigor and a sense of spiritual power, as if he could say to a mountain, "Be cast into the sea," and it would be done. It is this sense of spiritual exaltation and power which tells him that the work has been successfully accomplished. It is, however, advisable to repeat the meditation at intervals for 2 or 3 days in case another thought form is formulated and sent after the first. As for the sender of the thought form, when the absorption takes place, he will feel that virtue has gone out of him and may even be reduced temporarily to a state of semi-collapse. He will soon revive, however, but with his power for evil of this particular type considerably reduced for some time to come. And if he have the possibility of reform in his nature, it may even be that he himself will be permanently freed from this type of evil. The great advantage of this method is that it actually destroys the evil root and branch, whereas the mere destruction of a thought form is like cutting off the top of a weed. On the other hand, it can only be done by an advanced occultist keyed up to the highest pitch. If one is disturbed or harassed, or has in any degree lost his nerve, one dare not attempt it. If the rapport is perceived as a line of light, a cord, or any similar form attached to the solar plexus, the forehead, or any other part of the body, the best way of severing the rapport is to forge a magical weapon and cut it. In fact, if a rapport is felt, then the first thing to do is to visualize the cord and try to see where it attaches. The solar plexus is the most common place. Next, formulate the cross-handled sword as already described and invoke God's blessing upon it. Then visualize a flaming torch and invoke the power of the Holy Ghost, whose symbol it is. Now with the sword, hack through this cord or ray until every shred is severed. Then sear the stump with the consecrated fire of the torch until it shrivels up and falls off from its point of attachment to your body. After such a severing, one must of course take the ordinary human precautions to prevent the link being reformed. Refuse to meet the person responsible for its formulation, or to either read or answer letters from him. In fact, cut off physical communications as thoroughly and resolutely as one has cut off astral ones for a period of some months at least. There are occasions, however, when a person is so completely overshadowed and dominated that he cannot perform this operation for himself. The magical operation of substitution can then be performed if he can find a friend ready to undertake the task. In order to perform this operation, the two friends agree that it shall be done. But the one who is to become the substitute does not tell the original victim when he proposes to undertake the operation, lest the latter should be so completely in the hands of the dominator that he should give the game away involuntarily. Choose a time at which he is sure his friend is asleep. The substitute concentrates upon him and imagines himself to be standing beside him and visualizes the cord or ray of the rapport stretching from his friend out into space. If you can visualize its other point of attachment in the dominator, so much the better. He then formulates the sword and the torch as above described, and with these in his hands he imagines himself stepping right through the line of rapport so as to break it with his body. He must not use either sword or touch for this process, but break it with his own flesh, as it were. Having thus severed it from his friend, he should then go for it with sword and touch with all of his strength as it tries to enwrap him, as it assuredly will do, for it resembles nothing so much as a tentacle of an octopus. He should go for it hammer and tongs, making up in zeal what he lacks in knowledge until he's had enough and begins to curl up and withdraw. The combat, of course, takes place in the imagination, but if a clear and vivid image is produced, it will be effectual. In illustration of this method, I may mention a case I once handled by its means. I was asked if I could help a woman who had been a lifelong invalid, but whose case the many doctors she had consulted were neither able to diagnose satisfactorily nor to help. They all agreed that there was nothing organic the matter with her, and after trying to, in vain, get her better, they generally united in saying that it was pure hysteria. She suffered from a chronic condition of exhaustism, indigestion, attacks of vomiting, blinding headache, and palpitation of the heart. She was, however, not in the least of a neurotic disposition, but a quiet, sensible, intellectual woman bearing her sufferings with fortitude. I made a psychic diagnosis and came to the following conclusion: that for many past lives she had been upon the path, and that in her last life, a male incarnation, in order to speed up her progress, she had traveled in the East and eventually took initiation into one of the Tibetan orders, which unfortunately turned out to be upon the left-hand path, where she learnt the Hatha Yoga, which gives control over the functions of the body. In her present life, she retained the powers her training had given her, but not the memory of its technique. Consequently, her emotional states affected these automatic systems of nervous control, whose functions are normally not under the direction of the mind. Whenever, therefore, she was emotionally disturbed, her subconscious mentation overflowed into the automatic mind and threw certain of the functional systems of the body out of gear. It is my belief that this explanation affords a key to the good many cases of functional disorder. Many people, in the course of occult meditative practices, obtain control of the automatic mind, which controls the functioning of the bodily organs. It may be recalled that the famous scientist Sir Francis Galton, the founder of the science of eugenics, experimented with mental control of respiration, and having obtained it, found that the automatic function had fallen into abeyance, and he had to spend 3 anxious days breathing by willpower and voluntary attention until the automatic function was reestablished. In this particular case, however, there was more than disturbance of function. There was peculiar and very marked chronic exhaustion. I formed the opinion that a rapport still existed between her and the Tibetan order, of which she had been an initiate in her previous life. As is well known to the occultist, one returns life after life to the order of which one is an initiate, the rapport being a very strong one. This is one of the reasons why the great mystery schools have no need to make themselves known by advertising. They know their own and pick them up on the astral plane. But while it is an invaluable thing to be under the aegis of a reputable order, it is an exceedingly unpleasant thing to stand in a similar relation to a disreputable order. In this particular case, it was my opinion that the order to which this lady had belonged in her previous life had sunk to a very low ebb indeed, and its leaders were deliberately drawing upon the vitality of its members. Acting upon this hypothesis, I projected myself astrally in the way I have already described and visited this lady at night. I perceived that from her solar plexus, as she lay asleep, there outstretched a black, elastic, stringy-looking substance that resembled nothing so much as a stick of Spanish licorice that had been chewed by a small boy. This went off into space. Upon trying to see it further end, I had a brief and far-off vision of a monastery with a Chinese type of roof perched on a crag among vast mountains. I tackled the situation by the simple expedient of passing in my astral body athwart the line of black substance, thus breaking its immediately transferred itself to my solar plexus, and for a moment I felt a surge of tempting thoughts urging me to get this woman under my thumb and exploit her to her full financial capacity. I cast these out and went for the rope of astral licorice in the manner I have described, casting it off and searing the stump, and the satisfaction of seeing it curl up and disappear into the darkness. I then fell into what I considered a well-earned sleep. I had told this lady nothing of my ideas because I wanted to see whether I could clear up the case by working solely on the occult hypothesis without any admixture of suggestion. Next morning I visited her to see how she was getting on, and found her sitting up in her bed, eating a hearty breakfast and looking an entirely different woman. to the gray-faced, exhausted creature I had seen the day before. Without waiting for an inquiry from me, she said, "I don't know what has been done, but I feel as if something has been broken and I am free." After breakfast, she got up, went for a stroll, and met the doctor who was attending her in the street. So great was the change in her appearance that he failed to recognize her until she spoke to him. I told her that in my opinion she ought to have nothing whatsoever to do with occult studies, lest she reform the magnetic link with her old order, and also taught her how to prevent her subconscious mind from giving disruptive suggestions to her body systems of functional control. For some years she remained in good health, but later, unfortunately, took up the study of occultism again and relapsed into a condition approximating her previous one, having presumably reforged the contacts with the Tibetan Brotherhood, which had proved so disastrous to her. There are so many stories of the appearance of guardian angels at moments of crisis that even the most skeptical must admit that there is a case to be answered. There's a tradition in Devon that if Drake's drum, which is preserved at Buckland Abbey near Tavistock, is beaten in a time of crisis, Drake himself will return to lead the fleets of England. Newbolt has immortalized the legend in his famous poem. "Take my drum to Devon, hang it by the shore, beat it when your powder's running low. If the dawn sight Devon, I'll coit the port of heaven, and drum them up to the channel as we drummed them long ago." The idea of the hero who returns to lead his people, the guardian angel that appears in times of crisis, is sealed deep in the hearts of all nations, and nothing will eradicate it. Innumerable instances were reported by the men returning from trenches during the war. Let us again refer to the ancient wisdom of the Kabbalah, that storehouse of occult knowledge. We learn here of the good angel and the evil angel of the soul of man who stand behind his right and left shoulder, the one tempting him, the other inspiring him. Translate the dark angel into terms of modern thought, and we have the Freudian subconsciousness. But the Freudians fail to realize that there is also a bright angel who stands behind the right shoulder of every man. This is a mystic superconsciousness, or in other words, the higher self, the holy guardian angel, whom Aber-Melin sought with such ardor and effort. We all know that, when caught off our guard, there comes a dark temptation from the depths of our lower selves. Something atavistic stirs, and we think thoughts or even do deeds of which we would never have believed ourselves capable. We've heard the voice of the dark angel speaking. Equally in times of dire stress, when we have our backs to the wall and we are fighting for more than our physical lives, another voice makes himself heard, the voice of the bright angel. I have never known this to occur when a man was fighting simply for his physical life. To those who see beyond the veil, death is no great evil. But in times of spiritual crisis, when the very self is being swept away, then it is that the cry of the soul is heard, and something manifests out of the midst of the unseen, manifests in a form that is comprehensible to the one who calls. Whether intense stress induces a temporary expansion of consciousness, a fugitive psychism, or whether a being of its own volition passes through the veil and manifests, I do not know. There are never any details available of these incidents. They take place only in times of dire stress and go as swiftly as they came, leaving no trace except upon the soul. I maintain that even as the lower self can rise up in moments of temptation, so can the higher self descend in moments of spiritual crisis. It is the aim of the mystic to live exclusively in the higher self. It is the aim of the occultist to bring this higher self through into manifestation in brain consciousness. In my flesh shall I see God. Just as surely as the lower self can rise up and betray us to some horrible deed, so can the higher self come to the rescue, terrible as an army with banners. I've already told of the mysterious voice which instructed me how to extricate myself from grave psychic danger. Upon other occasions of stress and strain, I have experienced a sudden expansion or shifting of the level of consciousness. The higher self has descended and taken control. From being in the midst of turmoil, and one is suddenly raised high above and sees all the circumstances of one's life spread out like the bird's eye view, as one might see the land from a high place, and one knows intuitively the outcome of the matter. All emotional turmoil ceases, and one is like a ship hove to, securely riding out the storm. When this occurs to me, the memory of my past incarnations is always vividly present. Also, it is this simultaneous wakening of the past which makes me feel that the voice is that of my own higher self and not of another entity. It is my belief that in times of spiritual crisis, the man that has faith in the law of God can rise up and invoke its protection, and a seeming miracle will be performed for its benefit. Yet there can be no breach of natural law. Therefore, such a miracle must simply be an example of the working of a law with which we are as yet unfamiliar, just as an eclipse appears to the savage as a miracle, but to the astronomer as a natural phenomenon which can be forecast with accuracy. What is it that induces this change of control in our lives? We're familiar with the fact that the engine of a car has 3 speeds and a reverse. Maybe it not for that our minds are also geared, and that it is a changing of gears which induces psychism. Are there not times when we get into reverse and the ape and tiger within us take charge? Behind the physical plane lies the astral plane, and behind the astral plane lies the mental plane, and behind the mental plane lies the spiritual plane, each plane acting as plane of causation to the one beneath it, and each in turn being controlled from the subtler planes above it. When we change gear, consciousness is shifted from a denser to a subtler plane, and we begin to move among remoter and remoter causes, of which the happenings upon the physical plane are the end results. We manipulate these causes, and the results are immediately affected. When we change gear from the physical to the astral, we find ourselves upon the plane of psychic consciousness and the lesser magic. Supposing a psychic combat is taking place between 2 occultists, if one of them is such a grade that he can change gear again so that the consciousness is lifted from the astral to the mental plane, he will be in the sphere of the greater magic and be in control of the situation. The other can make no stand against him. But what happens in the case of the rare and mystic soul who can shift consciousness once again and engage the gears of a purely spiritual power? He has outclassed the adept. There are many souls who have this mystical spiritual consciousness, although they have no occult knowledge. Between the higher and lower modes of thought, there is a great gulf fixed across, which they leap precariously. If in a time of crisis they're able to rise up in faith and enter this mystical consciousness and be still, they will have the upper air of any occultist who relies upon nothing save the techniques of occultism. The question of mystical consciousness is, however, outside the scope of our present inquiry, which is concerned with psychic methods and the traditional techniques of occultists. Different temperaments will employ different methods, and the mystical methods do not appeal to everybody. The occultist does not ignore the Christ force. However, he recognizes it as among the hierarchy of supreme forces of the universe. Although he may not be prepared to assign to it the exclusive position which it occupies in the heart of the Christian mystic, in the Western tradition, it is symbolized by Tiferet, the central Sephirah of the 10 holy Sephiroth of the Kabbalistic tree of life. The Christ force is the equilibrating, compensating, healing, redeeming, purifying factor of the universe. It should be invoked in every operation of psychic self-defense, where any human element, incarnate or discarnate, is concerned. Where non-human elements such as elementals, thought forms, or the Qliphoth have to be dealt with, it is the power of God, the Father, as creator of the universe that is invoked. His supremacy over all the kingdoms of nature, visible and invisible, being affirmed, God, the Holy Ghost, is the force that is employed in initiation, and it should be not invoked during times of psychic difficulty, as its influence will tend to intensify the condition and render the veil yet thinner. There's a very curious aspect of the occult field concerning which something must be said in the present pages, which are not a great deal can be revealed, and to be frank, I do not know a great deal about it myself, but only such aspects I have actually come across. I've always heard it called the occult police. Others may know it by different names, but I believe to be a very real and concrete thing, though its organization is not upon the physical plane. Not so far as I know are its mundane activities gathered up into a single pair of hands. I've crossed its trail upon a number of occasions and played my part in its activities, and I have talked with others who have also been concerned in it. And they have also said, as I do, that it is in the inner voice and circumstances that direct our activities when we cooperate with this mysterious organization. I think myself that it is organized in national units, for people seem to go in and out of jurisdiction or to be passed on from one to another. In my experience, it has no particular political bias, but concerns itself solely with occult methods applied to criminal ends and offenses against society. She goes on to give some examples, and I suggest that you read further. But I think this really captures the methods of self-defense that she spoke of. Really, I think the most powerful thing that you can do is absorption, which requires you to be sort of a psychic black belt, meaning that you have love for everything that you see. And if a negative entity comes to attack you, or a person is attacking you, you have to fight it with love. It's really hard to think that way, but it is unstoppable. It's an unstoppable force. Negative entities work through intermediaries because they don't want to get close to somebody that could actually absorb them. So you can utilize that absorption where you take in someone's power with love. And if you ever feel like you're being attacked, don't sit in fear. They're going to feed on that. You have to sit in love and light, and you have to train yourself to be able to change your consciousness at any given time, no matter what the situation, so that just like in the movie Aliens, where the alien is right at you, you are calm and you are thinking loving thoughts. It's hard to do, but if you do it, you're going to see results, especially when it comes to psychic defense. If somebody's attacking you, then you want to send them love and imagine them different. And if you continue to do that, you'll start to see results. So hopefully this helps for those who might be struggling with this sort of situation. There's definitely some things that you can do. Try the bath, create some water, create a magic circle, continually protect yourself. Other things that I've used is clapping around the house, and then you don't clean your hands until you're done and you've thoroughly cleaned them before touching anything else. Also, just flinging salt around certain corners of the house can work. If you sense a presence in your house that is a thought form or something, you can also laugh. Laughing is a very powerful thing to do. They are frightened by laughter. It evokes a certain confidence, and they'll often run away. Please put in the comments what you do to cleanse and to defend yourself on a psychic level. I do believe once you're at a certain level, you don't need to worry about it. If you're always meditating and keeping in that vibration of pure unity with God and love, then you are safe. And I think it's pretty likely that most of the people that are listening to the podcast are those people. But hey, there's unusual cases everywhere. And if you didn't know about this stuff, at least you have knowledge of it now. Sort of a user's manual. So if you ever encounter something like this, you can refer back to this. In any case, all episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.